I'm a dirty, rotten sinner. I would reply back to my parents when they asked me, "What are you, Dominique?" This was one of the first phrases I learned, an essential mantra that encapsulated my early understanding of self within the confines of a strict religious upbringing. It was a stark reminder that without Jesus and God, I was inherently worthless and flawed. And this belief was more than just a lesson. It was a foundational truth that shaped my identity and self-worth from a very young age. My earliest memories are set against the backdrop of a prison compound in South Africa. This isn't your typical childhood environment, as my father worked for the correctional services. Our home was part of a sprawling complex where the families of prison staff lived, a community isolated from the outside world by high walls and barbed wire. The compound was both a fortress and a prison, offering security while simultaneously limiting our freedom. Life on the compound was governed by its own rules and rhythms, and it was a close-knit community where everyone knew each other and daily routines were tightly controlled. I remember the sense of order and discipline that permeated every aspect of our lives. From a young age, I understood that our lives were different from those of other children. And there was a rigid structure to our days, dictated not only by the needs of the prison, but also by the tenets of our faith. And as members of the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, or the IFB, my family adhered to a strict code of conduct. Sundays were reserved for church, with services that stretched for hours, punctuated by sermons emphasizing obedience, humility, and the fear of God. And every aspect of our lives was infused with religious significance, from the meals we ate to the clothes we wore. Yet, within the compound's confines, there was a semblance of normalcy. We played with other children, rode our bikes, and gathered at the compound's small playgrounds. But even in these moments of childhood joy, there was an underlying tension, a sense that I was different, set apart by my beliefs and my circumstances. In our household, religion was not just a part of life. It was a foundation upon which everything was built. My parents were devout believers, committed to raising their children in accordance to the teachings of the Bible. They believed their duty as parents were to instill in us a deep and abiding faith, ensuring we followed the path of righteousness. This included internalizing the belief that we were inherently flawed, reinforcing the need for divine intervention to redeem us from our sinful nature. Daily life was structured around religious observances. Each morning began with family devotions, a time for reading and scripture and praying together. This ritual was intended to center our lives around God, to remind us of our purpose and our place in the world. My mother, in particular, was a formidable presence in my spiritual education. She was determined that we understand the importance of living a godly life, and she used every opportunity to enforce this message. Her dedication was unwavering, and she expected nothing less from us. There was little room for questioning or dissent. Obedience was demanded, and failure to comply was met with swift correction. My father, while equally devout, played a different role. His job with the correctional services meant he was often absent, but when he was home, he reinforced the lessons my mother taught. He saw himself as a spiritual leader, responsible for guiding his family in matters of faith. And together, my parents created an environment where religion was the lens through which we viewed the world. Despite the insular nature of our lives on the compound, there were moments when the outside world intruded. These encounters were often bewildering, filled with both wonder and fear as I began to understand the vastness and complexity of life beyond our small community. My first real encounter with the outside world came when I started attending school. Each morning, I would board a bus with other children from the compound and travel to a local public school. It was a journey that took us beyond the walls of our enclave and into a world that was both familiar and foreign. At school, I quickly realized that my life was different from that of my classmates. They spoke of things I'd never experienced: television shows, movies, theaters, celebrations, and outings to places I'd only heard of. I felt a sense of both curiosity and alienation, as if I were a visitor from another planet trying to understand the customs and language of the natives. This was my first real taste of the conflict between the world I was raised in and the world outside. It was a moment that planted a seed of doubt in my mind, a small crack in the facade of certainty that had surrounded my childhood. I began to question the beliefs that I had been taught, wondering if there might be other ways of seeing and understanding the world. Now, the independent fundamental Baptists are adept at slowly tightening their grips on its followers, gradually pulling them deeper into the control. While my formative years were already strict, I did attend public school for the first 4 years before being pulled into the homeschooling. This shift marked the beginning of a more intense descent into the world of high control. The process was systematic and calculated, with the IFB's influence slowly but surely extending its reaches into every aspect of our lives, and the noose of control tightened over the years, with my parents adopting increasingly rigid rules and practices. This gradual shift was accompanied by a subtle form of gaslighting and the shaping of a narcissistic personality that favored compliance over individuality. These early experiences highlighted the duality of my childhood, the coexistence of two worlds that seemed at odds with each other. At home, I was a dutiful daughter, eager to please my parents and live up to their expectations. But at school I was exposed to new ideas and perspectives that challenged the narrow views that I had been raised with. This duality created a sense of tension within me, a push and pull between the desire to belong and the need to explore. And I learned to navigate these competing influences by developing a kind of double consciousness. I became adept at presenting different versions of myself depending on the context and the audience. And in many ways, this ability to adapt was a survival mechanism. It allowed me to maintain the outward appearance of conformity while secretly nurturing my thoughts and questions. It was a delicate balancing act and one that required constant vigilance and careful negotiation. The experience of living in two conflicting worlds often leads children to develop dissociative coping mechanisms. Dissociation is a mental process that causes a lack of connection in a person's thoughts, memories, and sense of identity. For children, especially those in high control environments like the one I grew up in, dissociation can become a form of psychological self-preservation. Research has shown that children who experience chronic stress and trauma, such as that from living under strict religious doctrines, often develop dissociative tendencies as a way to cope with their environment. According to a study published in the Journal of Trauma and Dissociation, children exposed to higher levels of emotional and psychological stress often create mental barriers to protect themselves from overwhelming emotions and contradictions in their lives. And over time, these coping mechanisms can become ingrained, leading to difficulty in forming a cohesive identity and establishing trust and authenticity in relationships. Disassociation can result in feelings of detachment from reality, emotional numbness, and difficulty in processing emotions. And as adults, individuals with a history of disassociation can struggle with intimacy, self awareness, and mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. A key finding from these studies is that disassociation can lead to difficulties in maintaining consistent personal and professional relationships. The protective layers created during childhood can hinder authentic self-expression and result in pervasive sense of isolation and alienation. The internalization of contradictory beliefs and values can create cognitive dissonance, a state of mental discomfort that arises from holding conflicting beliefs. This dissonance can perpetuate feelings of guilt and shame, particularly when oneself is at odds with the identity imposed by external expectations. Navigating this duality and the resultant dissociation required develops a heightened sense of awareness and adaptability, and I learned to read situations and people quickly, discerning which versions of myself were safest to present in the given context. And this skill, though initially a survival mechanism, became both a burden and a blessing as I matured. On the one hand, it enabled me to protect myself from potential criticism and judgment. On the other hand, it inhibited my ability to fully embrace and express my authentic self. The layers of adaptation, though protective, often felt like barriers that prevented genuine connection and self-discovery. Now, reflecting on the duality of my childhood and the dissociative tendencies it fostered, I have come to appreciate the importance of integration and authenticity. The journey of healing requires peeling back the layers of protection to uncover the true self beneath. If there is one takeaway from this episode, it is the recognition of the power of resilience and the capacity of transformation. By understanding the coping mechanisms we develop as children, we can begin to dismantle the barriers that prevent us from living fully and authentically. And as I close this chapter, I invite you to reflect on the power of questioning and the courage it takes to seek your truth. Growing up in a world where conformity was expected and doubt was discouraged taught me the importance of listening to that quiet inner voice within, the voice that dares to ask why and seek to understand more deeply. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's the true strength comes not from following the path laid out for us, but by forging our own way forward. By embracing our unique journeys, we can find healing, reclaim our identities, and build a life that is authentically our own. Till next time.